Hello, and welcome to After the Epilogue, a book podcast. From our yearly reading wrap-ups to our opinions on popular books, we are centered around anything and everything book-related. So if you're a reader, make sure to stay tuned. We are your hosts.
I'm Maddie.
And I'm Maya, and today we will be talking about the Heartstopper universe. Finally.
Okay. So basically, if you don't know what Heartstopper is, Heartstopper started as a comic series. Was it on Webtoon originally?
Yeah.
It's on Webtoon.
It's on multiple
platforms. It follows the characters Charlie Spring and Nick Nelson as they develop a relationship and figure out their sexuality and identity. Their couple and their friends explore those identities together, but it's something that hasn't been seen before because it's lighthearted and it takes on issues in a fun way, I guess.
Yeah.
Okay. So I think the thing that's most important about Heartstopper especially is its lightheartedness, how happy it is, because like I said, it's something we haven't seen before, but also the representation they have in the show and in the comic because of how diverse it is.
They talk about mental health, different queer identities. They have biracial couples. They talk about different family structures. And it's just very diverse representation that even if when we do see it in media, it usually isn't in the capacity that we do in Heartstopper. And it tackles the issues with those identities and with that representation in a lighthearted way.
Yeah. It also... I was reading this article where they were talking about how Heartstopper doesn't just show representation or doesn't just tell you or have representation. They show you why you need that representation because as Nick Nelson especially is struggling to find someone he can relate to. And this is something he hasn't ever seen before and he doesn't know. So having Heartstopper, if Nick Nelson had Heartstopper, I think a lot of different things would have happened.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a big one I want to tackle, Nick Nelson, and how he's kind of the motherlode of all representation for a ton of people. And I think, at least for me, my TikTok page, when Heartstopper came out, or the Netflix show came out, was just, oh my god, Nick Nelson, Nick Nelson, Nick Nelson. And I think there's multiple reasons behind that, but I'm going to say it's because of representation. So what does Nick Nelson mean to you?
He represents so much and does so much for so many people. He shows a realistic approach to discovering your sexuality and the problems that arise, the internal thoughts, internal conflicts that come with that and discovering your identity. And then also, he does show that, like, needing representation.
Yeah.
And so he's just overall a very relatable teenage character. And showing the struggles in his social circles and working out his friend group and who he wants to hang out with is also just relatable for most teens, not even just queer teens or bisexual teens.
Yeah, I think another huge thing was that Nick Nelson found out or discovered his sexuality so late in life when there's a lot of queer shows or especially gay characters who are like, oh, I've always known I was gay. And for me, and I know for a ton of other people and friends, that was something that was like, oh, like it's okay to not know.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people have identified with his character for those reasons. Yeah.
I think one of the things that's so beautiful about Heartstopper is you have like Charlie Spring, who has always known his sexuality, and then you have Nick Nelson, who is just figuring it out. And they both have very different issues with their identities. And so it's all addressed instead of just having one stereotype or one way, one road. Because all people are different. All people's journeys are different. And so that's what makes Heartstopper so special.
Yeah. With their friends, Elle, she's another very good example of representation. That I've heard people talk about how they have identified with her and how this was something that has never been seen before in media again. again, talking about why it's not just Nick Nelson, but there are so many different types of representation in Heartstopper that makes it so important and influential on the culture today. And then, okay, back to Elle. Her trans identity does not define her. So it's brought up like once or twice in Heartstopper. I know many shows and books that I've read where they have trans characters. It's a major part of them that they have transitioned and that they are trans. Like, it's brought up multiple times, but in Heartstopper, Elle's just Elle. Like, she's just a girl. She's not trying to push that narrative. She's not trying to be like, I'm trans and that's me. She's just a girl. And she's also very happy, which, like I was talking about, there's not, like, Young Royals, awesome show, but it's a very sad show. And a lot of gay books and a lot of queer literature is just all so sad. And it ends sad, and it has sad parts, and there's just lots of tears. But Heartstopper changes this because Elle, or a reason is because Elle is such a happy character, and she's always positive.
Gives you hope.
Yeah.
And then with Elle specifically, like, it helps show that you're not just your identity. There are multiple aspects, even in just a side character.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And she has a romance plot, which is not common in trans characters and also side characters. So she wasn't just that funny best friend who happened to be a little quirky. She also was an important person. And then we have Charlie, obviously.
Mm-hmm. Charlie, you see good mental illness representation, especially with teens. And again, it takes on that lighthearted tone that we don't normally see, and it helps normalize mental health issues. Mm-hmm. And so that's what's so important about him. And then he also has that queer representation, being gay, openly gay at an all-boys private school.
Also, Charlie's family isn't very supportive. His mom doesn't really hate on him for being gay, but just isn't very nice to him and not very supportive. Like, she's fine with it, but she's not supportive of his lifestyle. And I think a big thing was being able to see Charlie happy, even though he doesn't have the best background familiar-wise.
I think with Charlie specifically, his family dynamic is very interesting because we have Tori Spring, his older sister, who definitely has mental health issues that are ignored because of Charlie and because of their parents and just how they live their lives. And then we have their parents who they're not supportive, but they definitely aren't like the Sarah Nelsons of the world.
Yeah.
And so you see that whole spectrum of coming out and acceptance. And I think that's really important representation because usually we see the best of the best and the worst of the worst, when that's not all support.
And it's not most either.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that was important. It's weird when we have such a wide population of people who have experienced issues and we're still not seeing them represented in media. And Heartstopper was obviously got so big because of the representation that so many people have been literally begging for and been wanting their entire lives. And Dan and Phil, this is a good example. I love Dan and Phil. They just came back to their YouTube channel and they've made so many Heartstopper mentions in their recent episodes talking about how if they had that type of representation growing up or as they started to develop their identities, that things might have been a lot more different for them. And then we have Tara and Darcy, our sapphic couple, the sapphic couple in Heartstopper, which obviously you don't see a lot ever, and you don't see a lot of happiness come from them. And while they do have their struggles, especially in season 2, you still get to see how dedicated they are to each other and how much of a loving relationship they've developed, which is, again, something you don't see a lot.
One of the few biracial couples in the show.
Mm-hmm.
So that's also important representation. And then I think in a common discussion in the sapphic community is the usage of the word lesbian and how many people coming to terms with their identity struggle with it. And we see that represented in Tara, which is very important. And then Darcy struggles in her home life with unsupportive parents. And so, again, as side characters, it's all acting as important representation that so many people can see themselves in. And I think Alice Oseman does a really good job of making every character crucial to the plot, making them involved, giving them their own storylines, but also making them crucial to the audience, giving representation in everyone she creates.
Yeah. A few other things that Darcy was someone who was always, or at least as long as we've known her, has been out as a lesbian. Like, everyone has known Darcy, or am I getting, yeah, it's Darcy. Darcy was a lesbian, but Tara took a lot longer to identify with that term and to be able to say it out loud. They even make a joke, they're like, you had to kiss me 30 times before you even admitted you were a lesbian. Which again is something a lot of people in the sapphic community struggle with because that term has been used harshly and negatively for so long. So seeing them be able to joke about it and kind of laugh about their struggles was something you don't see. And I know a lot of the sapphic shows I've watched, you don't ever even see them identify themselves as queer or like as a lesbian or bisexual. Whatever term you want to use, they're just in a fling, usually. And that's a bad thing that has been a popular trend in sapphic media. But Tara and Darcy are so committed and dedicated to each other. I think it's very important to see that it doesn't just have to be a fling. You know, it can be a real thing that you build your life around. And then there's the teachers, which I love the teachers. Mr. Farouk and Mr. Ajay?
Yeah.
Sure. That guy.
And Coach Singh, too.
Oh, and Coach Singh, yes.
There's so much.
Teacher drama. And while the characters aren't as developed, you get hints of their relationship, especially in season 2 with Mr. Farouk and Mr. Ajay. Being able to develop that relationship, even though Mr. Farouk wasn't someone who's been on a lot of dates and really put himself out there as a teen, it was showing that you can still find happiness with your queer identity, even as you grow older, which I thought was pretty cool. Talking about the representation, that impact has had a ton of impact. That representation has had a ton of impact on the younger community and the older community alike, and that's why it became such a big, big hit, especially when season 1 came out, with the casting and the adaptation. It was all very beautiful and very touching to everybody. So popular on TikTok, blew up. I know it's translated. The comics are translated in so many different languages, and it's literally a worldwide phenomenon now.
The show got very little promotion before it was put on Netflix. And then afterwards, every Netflix account was complete Heartstopper for months. And they got renewed for 2 seasons after season 1, which is not something you see with LGBTQ shows.
Never.
Very rare. And so I think that it's in itself shows its impact. The young adult genre is fairly new. And so teens have not been represented in the media in the past like they are being represented now. And I think the impact and the diffusion of Heartstopper just shows how important this representation is for this specific age range.
Yeah, I mentioned Dan and Phil earlier, but in their videos, they've always said the need for representation and how they kind of needed representation when they were younger. And because they didn't have that, they struggled with internalized homophobia. So a Heartstopper is a very good example of a piece of media that has reduced isolation in queer kids because of how alone they felt, especially like in small towns, private schools, because no one is open about that sort of topic. And as it becomes something that people can open up more about, I think there's no harm. Obviously, there's a great benefit to all of this in normalizing these feelings of queer kids so that they don't have to have internalized homophobia and they don't have to hate themselves for wanting to be a certain way.
It normalizes being queer. It normalizes going through those mental health struggles, and it creates a community. People see how popular the show is on social media. They know there are other people out there like them, and then they see the characters and they know that the representation is there because that's how people, those are problems people experience in real life, making their issues feel more normalized. And not as major.
Yeah.
Because there is another side to it. And whether there's an end or not, but there is this happy tone in Heartstopper that can help so many kids go into their issues looking for the other side.
Yeah. You made a good point with the other side thing. That's amazing. That was beautiful.
Thank you.
Yeah, because not only are they seeing this representation and being like, oh, this is normal, they're also able to be like, oh, I can be happy. I don't have to hide it either. I can be out and I can be in a dedicated queer relationship where I don't have to hide my identity and I can live a normal life.
We talked about the important representation in Heartstopper, but it also just addresses a lot of issues that a lot of teens face and don't know how to go about. I think when Charlie struggles with his mental health specifically, they talk about how you need to lean on other people. You can't just put it all on yourself, put all the pressure on yourself. But also, Nick couldn't put all of the pressure on himself.
Yeah.
It wasn't his responsibility. And he wasn't the only one who could help.
Yeah.
And so it takes a village.
It wasn't something that could be cured either. Something he would continue to struggle with.
And that there might not be might not be an end, but it's a constant journey of healing and working through it.
Yeah.
Things. So there are lots of great things you can learn from Heartstopper, no matter who you are, or what you're facing in your life.
Yeah. I think even if you're not queer, even if you don't want to identify with any of those terms, I think Heartstopper is something that you personally should go check out, because there's representation for you too, no matter who you are.
And then Heartstopper has had an crazy impact on teens themselves, but also just the world overall. The Heartstopper cast are all pretty vocal on issues they have faced and become big change makers and fought for change and advocated for queer people specifically. And then the show won a ton of Emmys at the first Children's Emmy. And for a queer show to win multiple Emmys at the Children's Emmys, that is monumental in itself, because it normalizes queer youth.
Yeah.
And that is so, so important. And it normalizes normal teens. It's not euphoria. These people are living normal lives.
They're cringy. They are going through an awkward phase. They're not these grown adults, and they're played by actual teens also.
Or just out of their teens.
Yeah. Which is obviously great.
Yes. Representation is so important.
It is. And, I think that people struggle with identifying why queer representation is important, especially if you don't identify as queer. Because they think, not everybody, but some people think that it's kind of just shoving it down their throats. But being able to see a show where, yes, it's queer. It's very queer. It's very gay. There's lots of gay people in this show. They're not trying to be hey, everyone's gay. There's straight people too. It's not shoving an agenda down their throats. It's trying to save queer youth. and it's got an important message. And another thing, they show, they don't tell, or they show, they don't tell. They can show you why you need that representation while also providing you with that representation. It's beautiful. I love Heartstopper.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the criticism it gets is unjustified.
Yeah.
A lot of people hate on it for being cringy, but fun fact, that's how teens are.
Yeah.
That is how we live our lives.
They're too used to euphoria.
I mean, honestly, yeah.
I mean, I'm not hating on euphoria, but like that's not, you know this, that's not how high school plays out.
Yes, for most people, I assume.
I would say for all people.
So yeah, overall, Heartstopper is so important, especially for teens, but also with those older characters, the teachers specifically.
Yeah.
There's representation for almost everybody, if not everybody, in this media. So it's really important, it's really crucial for teens, and the impact it has had on the teen population and on the world overall is incredible. So, yeah, I recommend it to everyone, specifically teens, as it can really help you maybe figure out your life.
Yeah.
But also just see someone relatable and validate your feelings.
Yeah. For people who aren't queer, you can see a different point of view of how people and why people might struggle with this. Why some people don't want to come out, why others do. It can kind of give you a point of view that you might not have thought about before and make you a more sympathetic person overall.
And the representation with mental health, different family structures, friend groups, just the relationship overall, despite it being queer, it's a very normal high school relationship. So no matter how you identify, no matter what you're going through in your life, you will most likely gain something from it that is applicable to your life.
Yeah.
So.
And I know Heartstopper is done. Like, I know it's been a while since it's came out.
We're getting season 3.
But we are getting season 3, and they're finally filming
and
it.
book 5.
Oh, yeah.
So
book 5 is coming out, pre-orders are already done.
Mm-hmm. But you can check it out for free, the comic or the graphic novel, on Webtoon, other places.
Alice Oseman's website.
Yep. And then you can buy the physical books at any bookstore.
Yep.
Pretty much. And then she has a few novellas and other novels that
she does.
Intersect with the Heartstopper universe. So,
yeah,
there's so much.
If you haven't gotten into that or gone down that rabbit hole, that's something you could do. Solitaire, this winter.
Radio Silence.
I Was Born for This.
That doesn't have Heartstopper.
Well, it's still in the universe, no?
It's a good, yes. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Just saying.
Go down that rabbit hole because they all have important representation and they're all very well structured.
Important representation for teens.
Thank you.
So check out all of Alice Oseman's work because I have, and
check
it's incredible.
out Alice Oseman.
Check out Alice Oseman. Anyway, thank you so much for listening to this episode of After the Epilogue. Check out After the Epilogue on Instagram and Twitter and
something. I'll put it somewhere on TikTok for updates and behind the scenes information.
After the Epilogue is hosted and produced by Madelyn Glenn and Maya Ortiz.
Thank you for watching.